These men and women are the backbone of our evolving foreign policy. From civil wars to sectarian violence. From trade conflicts to economies looking inwards. They tackle emerging global issues and shape and redefine foreign policy. What does it mean to be a diplomat? What makes a diplomat? We talk to the men and women who are on the hot seat. This is the Diplomacy Show.
Welcome to the Diplomacy Show, where we look at the context behind the text, the meaning behind special events and gestures, the historical and geopolitical compulsions behind foreign policy choices. Our special guest today is Her Excellency Harinder Sidhu, Australia's High Commissioner to India. Australia, with 25 million people, both a country and a continent, 8 million square kilometers of exclusive economic zone, more than 40% of Antarctica as sovereign territory, now describes India as a strategic anchor in the Indo-Pacific region. For India, Australia is an important trading partner, an origin for raw material and resources, a destination for its students and skilled personnel, and a growing security partner in the bilateral, trilateral with Japan, and quadrilateral with the addition of the United States. High Commissioner Sidhu, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here today.
Now, you are representing the country of your destination or adoption in the country of your origin. Is that an asset or is that a challenge?
I think it's overwhelmingly been an asset. When I set out to argue the case to come to India as the High Commissioner, it was entirely from a professional perspective. The professional excitement of coming to India as High Commissioner is that this is still an evolving relationship between Australia and India. A High Commissioner has a great capacity to shape that relationship. And it wasn't until I got here that I started to realise that my origins have enriched my ability to shape that relationship, to connect with the country. So it has been, so far, personally as well as professionally rewarding.
So when you've been to different parts of India or in Delhi itself, when you met people, how have they responded to you as a person of Indian origin representing another country?
Well, with great warmth, actually. And so that's been terrific. You know, I've been really very warmly welcomed. I think Indians everywhere, and this is very powerfully the case since I've been here, tend to adopt the successes of people of Indian origin overseas. And so it's very much seen as much an Indian success as an Australian success in my appointment.
In many ways, things have picked up while you've been serving here, because the new dimensions of the India-Australia relationship, in a sense, started over the past 5 or 6 years. The first time an Indian Defence Minister visited Australia was in 2013. And in 2014, the Australian Prime Minister had visited here in September. And within 2 months, the Indian Prime Minister was on a bilateral visit in addition to G20 to Australia in November that year. Then, of course, the Australian Prime Minister visited in 2017. The Indian President visited in 2018. So during your tenure here, what is the kind of transformation and change that you are seeing in the relationship?
Yes, I think the effect of those visits that you talk about, and we've seen them continue. We've seen an uptick in the tempo of engagement between the two sides. You know, not just in terms of ministerial visits, but let's just take defence activities for an example. It was traditional for us to do 4 or 5 defence activities with each other per year, be that talks or exercises or those sorts of things. In 2014, that went up to 11 activities. In 2018, this year just passed, we had 38 individual defence activities between our two countries. What that's done is it's helped us see each other better, that we are building an understanding of what the other country is capable of and what we can gain from the relationship. We're also, as a result, I think, understanding each other better. one of the great mysteries, I think, of history is why is it that two countries like Australia and India that so obviously have so much in common have not really come together much closer than we have. But I'm absolutely delighted to see us rapidly moving down that path now.
So during your term here, are there any particular inflection points that you noticed in the relationship, or any particular choice of new words and phrases to describe the relationship that to you captured the new phase?
Well, I think the use increasingly by the Australian side, but I think also from the Indian side, I think we have now formed a shared adoption of the phrase Indo-Pacific. This is not new for Australia, by the way. We've been saying Indo-Pacific for about a decade. If you're Australia and half your coastline faces the Pacific and the other half faces the Indian Ocean, it makes absolute sense to see the Indo-Pacific as your strategic environment. More recently, though, we've issued a foreign policy white paper, we've had defence white papers. Australia has come to recognise that our strategic interest lies in a top tier, the phrase we use is a first tier or a top tier relationship with India. Minister Payne, the Foreign Minister Payne's use of the phrase strategic anchor is also another dimension of how we see India, the importance with which we invest in our relationship with India in the region.
I noticed that your foreign minister in one of her recent comments mentioned that almost 50% of Australia's exports go from your Indian Ocean ports.
Correct.
And 40% of overall trade flows through the Indian Ocean. In 2018, Australia brought out an India economic strategy paper. What was the reason for bringing out a fairly strong and extensive document focusing on an economic strategy for partnership with India? And what did it contain? What are the kind of recommendations that are there?
Well, that's a good question. I explained to you that we've been talking in strategic policy terms of the importance of having a first-tier relationship with India. You've already said how we've accelerated that relationship, and so much of that, when we stop and look at it, has happened in the strategic policy field, be it in diplomatic talks or in military exercises or engagements. The surprise to us is that we haven't built an economic relationship to match. And this is surprising for Australia because the model of our engagement with Asian countries has always been the economic relationship going ahead of a strategic relationship. So the government commissioned the India Economic Strategy in part to close this gap, to find ways through a long-term strategy. It is a strategy of how we can build a strong economic relationship that is commensurate with a first-tier relationship into the future, out for the next 20 years. So it looks beyond individual government policies. It looks at trends in how we come together. We know that India's economic growth makes it, over time, a very powerful magnet for business and economic links. And the strategy looks at how we can do that. It focuses on a framing which gets Australians to see India as a collection of states rather than a single whole, to start to appreciate the diversity in India, and to look at India also in terms of sectors that we can connect with.
Are there any specific sectors that have been identified that you would initially focus on?
Well, the strategy recommends focusing on 10 key sectors, 4 of which are what they call leading sectors, which is education, agribusiness, resources, and tourism. And those are the sectors that are seen to have the greatest promise for building the backbone of the economic relationship. Importantly, education is seen as a flagship sector. The reason for that is not just because so many Indian students are going to Australia, but actually because institution-to-institution links between educational institutions often open the door into other forms of engagement. For example, Australian universities that are partnering with the Indian School of Mines in Dhanbad in Jharkhand are also connecting that with Australian technologies, Australian businesses, Australian mining techniques, mine safety, a whole bunch of things come from the education relationship.
I was enthused to find that the Australian government has very quickly responded and in a sense accepted most of the recommendations in the economic strategy document. So what's your sense of what has been the response of the Australian government to the recommendations that came?
Well, I think it's been very warmly welcomed. It's been helped by the fact that the author of the strategy, Peter Varghese, is a very eminent Australian who has unrivaled credentials and understanding about India. Is a person who is held in great esteem and respect. I must say we were a little bit daunted by the fact that the strategy put forward 90 recommendations, but the government recognises, I think, the sheer power of what can happen if we were to adopt those recommendations. So the Prime Minister has embraced it.
Going beyond the economic to defence cooperation, and you mentioned that there is increased number and level of activities that are happening. But beyond just activities, are you also looking at a partnership in terms of trade, technology, production? Which way is the defence relationship headed?
You're right to say that we're doing a lot of activities, but often these activities are a bit case by case. Many of the activities now flow from a comprehensive strategic partnership, and we're working together operationally largely. For example, in April this year, the third iteration of the Australia-India bilateral naval exercise will take place off the coast of Visakhapatnam, for example. So much of it is sitting in the operational space, and that's probably where we will build. Once you build that, then technology exchanges and industrial exchanges tend to flow. And that is our hope, that we build a three-dimensional defence relationship.
I wanted to now talk about something that, of course, interests a lot of people in India, the growing number of Indian origin population in Australia. And I was looking at some of the figures, and it suggests that the number today is almost 700,000.
That's right.
Which puts the population at about 3% of Australia's population. Which is more than that in the United States, if you look at it in percentage terms.
Correct, yeah.
Or in the United Kingdom, perhaps just below that in Canada. So what is the response in Australia to this growing numbers of Indian origin population? And it seems to have expanded rapidly really over the past decade. So what is the reason for that? How are they integrated in Australian society? And how is the host country looking at this?
Well, I think what often people don't recognise is that you're right, there's been a sudden growth in the Indian population in the last decade or so. I think the numbers of Indians settling in Australia has tripled in the last decade. And for the last 2 or 3 years, skilled Indian migrants are the largest source of migrants across the board. But we're no strangers to people coming into our country to settle. Half of all Australians were either born overseas or have a parent who were born overseas, so either first or second generation migrants. We have over 200 different ethnicities living side by side in Australia. We are a hugely diverse, a very successful multicultural society. So those Indians who come to Australia to live are coming into a society that is used to absorbing people from many, many different backgrounds. But can I say this, that I think the Indian migrants to Australia have been particularly successful and particularly good at integrating. And this goes back to the point I made earlier about the fact that our two countries actually are very alike, and how we look at the world is very alike. It also helps that we both love cricket.
Yes, of course. And it helps in particular if the Indian team goes to Australia and does very well.
Yes, well, my congratulations to the Indian team, of course, but it's significantly helped diplomacy because Indians seem to like me all the more now that you have succeeded in Australia. But it was historic.
But also, as you mentioned, the Indian origin population in Australia in terms of education, skill levels, income levels is among the higher levels in Australia, and I'm sure that helps. But the fact that there is a commonality of political systems, values, and a growing strategic convergence between the two countries, in your sense, would that facilitate better acceptance of Indian origin populations coming to Australia with skills?
I think so. It is one thing to have skills, but I think it's quite another thing, and it's very important to look at the world the same way, to understand that there's certain rules for behaviour in a society, to understand that we have national aspirations that align with Indian national aspirations, for example. I think it's a source of great support and comfort to the Indian population in Australia that they don't have to deal with divergence between their country of origin and their country of adoption. So I think that that's all positive, as you suggest.
You did mention that Australia really has one coastline on the Indian Ocean and one in the Pacific, and the Indo-Pacific is a very important construct for Australia. And besides the bilateral between Australia and India, there is a trilateral at secretary level between India, Australia and Japan, and the quadrilateral involving the United States. And in the context of the Indo-Pacific, when I was reading the foreign policy strategy paper of Australia, which came out in 2017, there seems to be a bit of a dilemma that the United States is Australia's main security partner, and China is Australia's main trading partner. And the trade with China is almost twice the trade with the United States. How is Australia reconciling this dichotomy in its equations and relationships?
Well, I don't know that there actually is a dichotomy, to be honest. Yes, China is our major trading partner, but we have a huge economic relationship with the United States. As you say, the United States is our third largest trading partner. It is our largest investment partner by far. About 30% of investments in Australia come from the United States. China is our 9th largest source of investment. It's a very small part of the picture. I mean, it's not insignificant, of course, but it's not as big as. So we have a very large economic relationship with the United States. But while we have good friendly relations with both of them, with China and with the United States, only one of them is an ally. And so there's a depth to the relationship that we have with the United States that doesn't exist really with China. All that said, I think it's always worth remembering that Australia is a strong economy. We've had 27 years of uninterrupted economic growth now. We are very resilient to shocks if we need to. We are very strong in security and military terms. We are a regional power. So we can withstand the ups and downs of these relationships. We are able to deal with both the United States and with China as peers, really. So where we disagree, we will do so firmly and respectfully. We've done that with China on the South China Sea, and we've done that with the United States by expressing, our disagreement on their decision to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, for example. So it really doesn't pose that much of a struggle. Of course, it's something we have to think about.
Sure. So, and some time back, there was a sense that, especially under the Labour government some years ago, Australia was putting a lot of focus on its China relationship. And then there was some controversy related to what was seen as Chinese interference in Australia's internal politics. The economic strategy paper refers to the fact that Australia's main concern related to China is more the political system of China. And therefore, if that system becomes a dominating structure in the Asia-Pacific region, then it's a challenge to how Australia looks at the world. So given all that, how are you seeing the relationship with China evolving for Australia in the context of the Indo-Pacific?
What we would like to see, really, is a China. I don't think it's in anyone's interest for China's economy to go badly. I think 140 countries have China as their largest trading partner. China's economic success is the backbone of global prosperity, I think it's fair to say. So we want a successful China. But we also, and we've been very clear about this, we think it's very important that the rule of law is maintained, that countries continue to have the freedom to govern as they choose and to operate as they choose. At the Raisina Dialogue, the opening speech was given by the Prime Minister of Norway. She said a really important thing. She said, when big countries follow the rule of law, small countries take notice. There is a demonstration effect if countries stick by the rule of law. democracy gives us an enormous flexibility, and I think that what Australia and India understand is that it gives us a great deal of inner strength, and there is a power to democracy. And so working with other democracies to reinforce the value of democracy, to try and protect it, is very important. You mentioned foreign interference. Australia passed legislation to prevent foreign interference in our political process. We feel so strongly about that. Whether it comes from China or whether it comes from other sources, I think all of us are deeply concerned to find ways to preserve the integrity of our political and democratic process. It's a very fundamental backbone to security in the region.
In the defense policy paper that Australia had brought out in 2016, and again in your foreign policy strategy paper of 2017, I saw repeated references to the concerns related to terrorism, the challenge of terrorism that confronts also Australia. So can you describe what is the kind of challenge you're facing and Australia's responses to dealing with that?
Yeah, so the thing with terrorism is it's an amorphous beast. No sooner do you think you've tackled one part of the problem, then it's moved on to the next thing. Australia's faced, a very serious threat, I think pretty much since 9/11. Soon after the 9/11 attacks, we lost 88 Australians in the Bali bombing. And ever since then, we have built a very strong counter-terrorist edifice inside our own country with legislation. Our primary concern at the moment is the growth of violent extremism and foreign terrorist fighters. So looking at how we can work with our communities in Australia, how we can tackle the foreign terrorist fighter issue is a big issue for us.
And of course in India we've been facing our own challenge of terrorism sourced from Pakistan, cross-border terrorism.
Correct.
And all these terrorist groups tend to have linkages, so it's a common challenge.
Everybody's challenge is slightly different, and I think this is why we need to work together to share those perspectives and learnings.
Sure. So you've also put a lot of focus on the people-to-people dimension of relationships, and Australia itself is putting a lot of focus on its soft power and establishing linkages at the level of the people. And recently, Australia had done the Australia Fest in India. So can you tell us a little bit about that? What was the approach? What did you do? And till what time does it go on?
So thank you for that. It's a very important project of mine. This goes back, I think, to the fact that I feel I have a foot in both camps.
All right.
And I believe very firmly that if we're to have a really serious relationship between our two countries, it has to be textured. We have to really understand each other. So the best way to do that is to share those things about each other that we find interesting at a people-to-people level. So Australia Fest was launched in September last year in 2018. It's a 6-month festival that runs through to the 30th of March this year, covering 75 events in 20 cities with the full gamut of what you would call culture in a very wide sense. So not just art and literature and performances. We've done some fantastic things on those things. For example, we brought the indigenous dance company, the Bangara company, to perform at Qutub Minar. But also food, MasterChef, for example, the sorts of things that we really enjoy about each other. Science, bringing science exhibitions, children's theatre. And the grand finale, of course, will be not just an opera performance, but also the visit of the Australian cricket team, hopefully to redeem our credentials for the one-day internationals and the T20s in about a month's time.
Well, I'm sure the people in India would be looking forward to that and to a fair match, and whatever be the outcome. As they say, may the best team win.
Yes, absolutely.
But while you've been serving in India, has there been any issue beyond just the professional work that has sort of got you involved with a level of commitment and passion, some cause that you've involved yourself in?
Yeah, I think again this is something that's been a personal observation. I think India does have tremendous challenges, and it's really quite remarkable how India's rising to those challenges. So we're focused a little bit on the development side of the story and on the inclusion of people. And one side has been some work that we've done through the High Commission that I've supported on disability and actually finding ways to build the capacity of people with disabilities to participate in society. But the other has also been on gender equality. I think, it is very true to say that India will not reap its demographic dividend unless women are part of that picture. And women's health, I think, is a big part of that. So I've put my weight behind a campaign to raise awareness on cervical cancer. It is a cancer that is the largest killer of women, particularly in developing countries. But in India, 1 in 4 deaths in the world from cervical cancer happen in India. The tragedy of this is it is utterly preventable. An Australian scientist, Professor Ian Fraser at the University of Queensland, has developed the human papillomavirus vaccine, the HPV as it's called, vaccine. But beyond vaccination, of course, simple screening, simple interventions can actually reduce the rate quite dramatically. So, if there's one small piece of difference I can make through raising awareness, I think that will make a tremendous difference to the health of Indian women, but also to the development of India down the track. Healthy women raise healthy children and can participate fully in the community and the society.
Thank you. Thank you, High Commissioner, for your personal commitment to these very important issues.
Thank you.
And as our discussions showed, that there is growing and significant convergence between our two countries on strategic and other issues. There is additional opportunity to be tapped in the economic dimension. But I think the people-to-people dimension is something that provides a solid foundation and basis for sustaining this relationship.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very
here.
much.